You can't be down on yourself because you're feeling X, Y, and Z. You have to really kind of learn from it and like just be curious. Like, what is my body trying to tell me?
You shouldn't be defined by a diagnosis, and a diagnosis also, isn't the end of the world. There is healing. There is a way to live a much better, optimized life. It's not a death sentence. It all just depends, how you take that mentally, right? Are you going to be a victim or a victor?
What if I told you that the same mindset that builds championship teams also builds an extraordinary life? The same discipline that drives elite performance to greatness is the discipline that unlocks a longer, stronger, and more resilient future. This is where peak health meets peak performance, where we explore the science of longevity and the mindset of greatness. Because your legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's what you show up with every single day. This is the Legacy and Longevity Podcast. I'm Zach Dancel, your host.
Welcome back to the Legacy and Longevity Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Dancel. Today's guest is someone that I'm excited to bring on. Most women with PCOS are told the same thing by their doctor, right? Most of the time it's just to lose weight or here's birth control. But what if that actually isn't the problem? What if it's a symptom of something that's deeper, right? Going on in your body that your doctor just isn't educated on or needs to explore a little bit further. Well, today's guest has spent nearly 2 decades working inside the healthcare system as an ER nurse, really watching patients, go through the cycle, put onto medications, and just never truly addressing that root cause. She eventually walked away from the system to focus on what she really cared about and what she felt passionate about, helping people reverse their metabolic dysfunction, balance their hormones and really reclaim their health. So super excited to go in depth today about insulin resistance, PCOS, chronic disease, and just why modern medicine is missing what they're missing. So Lindsie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, of course. So, Lindsie, I think it's important to always introduce and start the act of storytelling about really introducing people from their origin story, right? I think that really connects with people because everyone is going through something. Everyone has a story and is able to connect with that on a personal level. So, you spent 20 years working as a nurse. What did you see inside the healthcare system that made you realize that something was fundamentally wrong?
Yeah, I was actually a CNA even before becoming a nurse. Like I knew I wanted that, that track because my goal was to help people. um, but and the ER is a little different beast, I think. But I was seeing just a lot of band-aid solutions, and you can kind of take that literally and figuratively. Um, I would see the one with PCOS coming in, and just physicians, I think, would just not know what to do. And it wasn't just PCOS, it was a lot of other, chronic conditions, autoimmune conditions, that type of thing. Of course, we would make sure there's nothing life threatening, but you would also kind of see everything that they're dealing with. And we were just kind of in and out. The resources, I mean, I worked at, obviously a couple different hospitals in my career. The resources were never there. I feel like as well. And then it turned into a lot of do more with less, as well. And I was on the management track. So I was an assistant manager at the hospital that I was working at when I left. And I couldn't tell people anymore. I couldn't tell them to do all these things. ER, again, a little different, but it was a lot of get in, get out. There's all these metrics, from the time they walk into the door to the time they're seen by the doctor till the time we draw the blood. And then depending on what they're diagnosed with, how fast you get them out the door. And then they get surveys, in the mail afterward, and we're rated on those surveys. And it's like, when you have short staff, short supplies, it just pushing them in and out, but also making sure that they feel like they're cared for just didn't sit right with me anymore. I just didn't really feel like I was fulfilling that passion. And I was blessed to have an opportunity to walk away. Of course, it was not an easy decision, at first, I should say, but I had that opportunity and kind of took a leap of faith. So yeah.
Yeah. So, I think obviously you experienced it firsthand. So I think you have A valid viewpoint of this, but do you feel that is it a doctor issue or is it a system problem?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's probably more system. There's and wherever you are in the country, it's different. Like I'm originally from Indiana. That's where I was working before I moved to Florida. Um, the healthcare system, and hospital system, I think is different in different places as well.
Yeah.
I worked at a for-profit hospital. I worked at a non-for-profit hospital. There were differences there. But in general, yeah, I think it is probably more of a system, thing. Of course, coming down to money, I think a lot of the times, no matter no matter where you're at. But it's just general, and I mean, in healthcare, and to no fault of their own, yes, physicians are taught certain things. They're taught to prescribe usually or cut. Like that's just
Yeah.
how it works. And a lot of the times, yeah, they get what, like I've heard maybe 3 hours in their entire 8 plus, medical school career internship and all that of nutrition, and just kind of lifestyle changes. And even in that regard, it's more towards like if somebody has this rare disease, this is kind of how you want to treat it, as far as nutrition. It's not lifestyle, it's not preventative care. And that's even how I was taught then in nursing school too. Like we were, what medications to give for what conditions, and then, how to kind of be proactive and think ahead with all that stuff, and knowing the normal from the not normal signs of things, obviously. But yeah, so I would say it's probably more of a system issue.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm definitely in the camp of the system. I don't think for the majority or the most part, no doctors are going into medical school to come out and actually do harm, right? I mean, that's what they're committing an oath for, right? Is to do no harm. And they're going into the system almost as if like, I mean, this is the law to them, right? Like this is the way to practice medicine. This is what they're taught. XYZ symptom is presented. You prescribe this. This is the standard of care. If you don't follow the standard of care, you have potential to lose your license, right? So, um, they're kind of forced. They are forced to do that, right? Because they could potentially lose their livelihood that they spent all these years and all this money to become this doctor and to get that title to be able to go out and practice medicine. But I do think there still is at some point there is some responsibility for that doctor, right? I mean, they did get the degree, they did go through residency, they saw firsthand, right? There's common sense there. At some point, you have to kind of open your eyes, which, most of my doctors in novel health, like that's why they came to us, right? Because they opened their eyes. They saw like, wow, just like you, right? Like
Yeah.
you're in the system. You saw that you weren't able to make the true change that could be made. So you had to go outside of the system and do it differently, right?
And granted, like ER, yes, like I mean, I loved the fast pace. Now, if I was still in nursing, I probably would not be doing that. But I love the fast pace, being on my toes all the time. And there were people that needed to be there. Like that's where our healthcare system does serve a purpose. When you have an accident or injury of some sort, that's amazing that we can truly, truly help that person. But when it comes to really managing, symptoms and diagnosing like chronic conditions, and healing, like to me that's my big thing. And there can be different degrees of that, but really helping that person improve their health, heal, just improve their quality of life, that's where I think the system does fit. Yeah.
No, it definitely it isn't geared towards that, getting to the root cause, but then also there's this whole shift that we're really pushing for where it's no longer about being reactive the way that we're so used to, right? It's really switching our viewpoint to that being that proactive, that preventative, because we know through lifestyle factors, changing your habits, that you can truly prevent these chronic diseases that are plaguing our nation, right?
Yeah.
But also, that's not what's being discussed in these doctor's appointments. It's certainly not being discussed in the hospitals because that is crisis management most of the time, which, to your point, you know, there is a place for the current system, right? It is for those emergencies. It does a great job at that, to quickly intervene to save someone's life, whether it's a emergency freak accident, a surgery, right? Like, we're not, saying that that type of medicine needs to go away, but we are saying the shift in people's priority on how they view and manage their health, right? To feel their best, to live their best, to have that quality of life, right? There's a much, much better way, which you know and I know, of this, functional longevity medicine mindset where you're being more proactive, you're being more preventive. And so I guess that leads me into my next question, right? Your personal health journey, right? Like,
Yeah.
you have also dealt with your own health challenges with, I believe you said lupus, celiac disease, some metabolic struggles. How did that experience change the way that you think about health and healing?
Yeah. So when I left nursing, it was to open a gym. And I was always the fitness freak. I've done 1.5 Ironmans. The half is a whole story by itself. But I've done half marathons and other triathlons and other races and stuff. So I've always been in that space, like even when I was working as a nurse. And so it just felt natural to offer this community of helping people through fitness. And I did that for about 5 years. But yes, during that journey, I had my own wake up call. So it was a different kind of stress, owning and running your own business and managing employees. Um, but I felt like I was fulfilling my passion more. But COVID hit and we had to close just like all the other gyms. Um, and it's amazing, like looking back, that was definitely the tipping point. And so I was waking up. We went to our house in North Carolina. Of course, like we're still trying to get outside, do all the things. We were doing like online classes it was a kickboxing gym, but I was waking up and my hands were hurting. And it was this pain that it wasn't an ache. It wasn't sharp. I couldn't even really describe it. Like I used to ask my patients, how would you describe the pain? I couldn't even really describe it. Sometimes it would get better throughout the day. But I was like, I'm not hitting the bag. I'm not punching a bag like I normally am. So what's going on? Kind of, dismissed it. And then we reopened. And then that summer, I think it was right around Memorial Day weekend, we were out with some friends having pizza. And I was like 2 slices in and I had the worst stomach pain. And I looked like I was 6 months pregnant. And I looked at my husband and I was like, we got to go. Like something is not right here. Got home, curled up on the couch, felt a little bit better. My brain, of course, started thinking, what could this be? And I thought, maybe this is a gluten reaction. And so I cut it out the whole week, the next week, and felt amazing. I felt amazing even after like a day or two. So still ignored my body a little bit, which is a lot of what I talk about with my clients on my podcast as well, listening to your body, because I've been there. And so finally in August of 2020, I went to see a functional health practitioner who focuses on gut health. And yeah, I had a positive ANA. I was basically, we kind of caught it early, even though like I didn't have any, major organ damage, nothing early in that regard, but I was definitely at that tipping point. I think one more stressor and I probably would have been headed right down that path. And then yes, because I'd cut out gluten, I all the testing was kind of coming back negative. Eventually got like genetic testing for celiac, which was positive. So thinking more than likely, yes, like it was probably celiac and I even today, if I don't intentionally have anything, but if I find out I have just the tiniest little bit of gluten, I'm like a mess for days. So that was my big wake up call, because then I realized how much nutrition played a role. And, I working as a nurse a little bit, of course, go, grab and go. Like I thought I was eating okay. And then when we had the gym, I thought again, like I'm eating fine, but it was still a lot of on the go meals. I would go to Panera instead of like McDonald's, thinking that was like a
Yeah.
better fast food option. Um, when I look back to, my sugar intake was super high, which was not helping anything, of course, either. So yeah, that was it right there. And I realized I had to change so many things. And then of course, since then, there's been ups and downs along the way. I've learned that, like oats, for example, I can do maybe a little bit here and there, but they actually react like gluten would in my body. And I discovered that with, with other things. And then, dairy, you kind of learn about some of these other things, and everybody's different. Everybody has this, different blueprint, different cultural background, different genetic background, different everything
Yeah.
that plays a role. And so it's not always so, cookie cutter either. And again, looking back, like, I was so, yes, I ignored all the signs, but like even in pictures, I was puffy. Like, I never really had a big weight issue, but if you looked at my face, like my face was puffy. Um, and so of course, once you start feeling better, too, and then you kind of become just so much more in tune with your body. So a couple of years later, my mom got sick. Of course, that was super stressful time, still running the gym. And I knew we caught it super early again, but I knew I was having like another flare up, then as well. And we were able to intervene. And
Yeah. So for those, listening or watching that don't know what celiac disease is, it's an autoimmune disorder where, ingestion of gluten, right, found in wheat, rye, barley, almost every single sauce you can think of. It is so commonly used that people just, don't really realize until like yourself, where you have these issues, bloating, feel puffy, starting to get, achy joints and things like that, to where you kind of have to start thinking. But that's gluten sensitivity and obviously dairy are the two most common sensitivities that we see at our practice. But I mean, it can be debilitating,
oh,
like obviously that you experienced. Um, so I mean, it's huge, and it's something that everyone, I feel, should seriously look forward, because that's, one of the big things, right? Is just like the systemic inflammation that constantly is happening, especially through food sensitivities, right? It's not going to be an immediate reaction like an allergy, right? It can present in 48, 72 hours. So you don't necessarily know what it is that you did that's causing this inflammation, but where your body is just constantly inflamed. It's a matter of time where your body just can't take it and it's going to shut down. And sounds like that's the story that you kind of went through.
yeah, yeah. And I think because I was so high stress, I would eat on the go a lot. That just would play a role too. I mean, I thought, like I said to my husband after, we started figuring all this out, and I was like, I would pretty much eat most of the time and just feel awful afterward. Like, I didn't feel satisfied and energized like you should with food, and yeah, that was another big thing. My energy levels, of course, were like crazy. And I was like, I've given up caffeine even since then. And, but of course I was drinking all the coffees and the energy drinks and all that stuff to try to supplement it. But yeah, like it can play a role. I ended up, like later on too, ended up having like a full blown allergic reaction. I still don't. We were in New York. We had just run a 5K. Went out to breakfast afterwards. Still not entirely sure what the reaction was to, but it was a super stressful time. Um, and I think it was just a combination of, of everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it was just a perfect storm of, constantly being in a sympathetic state.
Yep.
Your body's constantly inflamed, where, like I just said, like it gets to a point where your body and the immune system can no longer fight and heal and do what it's supposed to. Because I mean, we are the most advanced machines you could ever think of, right? So it's not just one thing; it's all, right. It is true whole body wellness, and I think that's, that's where medicine is headed, right? Truly personalized medicine, treating everybody as an N of one, right? Because there is no such thing as a cookie cutter model that, that works for everyone. Not everybody should be on the same diet. Everyone is going to have to be on a personalized diet. That's why I think any social media influencer that just sits there and is raving about, oh, carnivore diet is best for everybody or keto diet is best for everybody. Like, no, your account should be blocked.
Yes.
Stop talking about this unless you truly know what you're talking about, because it really is doing damage, right? Because especially people who have a following, who have this authority, from their followers, that they are actually going to go out there and do it, and then it's going to end up shooting themselves in the foot, because medicine it doesn't work that way, right? There's so many different factors, to your point, stress, sleep, exercise, genetics, whole foods diet, or your diet, that all have to take into account. So there's so many moving pieces, and if you're just going based off of a social influencer who felt great, right? And I'm not to say that those diets aren't good tools, right? There's times and reasons to use them for certain conditions, but it's not going to be that one size fits all model. It's not going to be best for everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So PCOS, right? I think you've created a podcast surrounding it, and it is a huge debilitating factor for a lot of women. It is the most common um, hormone issue that women have today, right? And it's constantly misdiagnosed, it's constantly mistreated. Talk to us a little bit more. First, break it down. What is PCOS? Um, and let's go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. So, so when I left the gym, started my own, health and nutrition coaching practice. And for a year, I was kind of like, seeing anybody and everybody, right? But when I decided, I'm like, I need to really find a niche. And I started doing the research. And my first client was actually like, she came to me because of her blood pressure and needed to lose weight, but she did have PCOS, which we were able to correct as well. I just felt really called to that community. I think going back to my ER days, like I mentioned, we would see a lot of these women come in and just see what they were dealing with. And you could, yeah, again, ER standpoint, but like the doctors just wouldn't really know what to do. So PCOS is polycystic ovary syndrome, for those of you who may not know. And you need usually 2 of 3 criteria to be diagnosed. The thing is, so in the name, right? Polycystic, so cysts on the ovaries. You don't even need that anymore to be diagnosed, because I think that's how far it's come. And it's amazing too. I've even talked to women like, my age now that didn't fit the typical profile. Like maybe they were thinner and back in the day they had cysts on their ovaries, but they were never officially, diagnosed. So yeah, so cysts on the ovaries is one of the criteria, one of the 2 that you need. High androgen levels, which are the male hormones. So, like testosterone. So we see a lot of facial hair, maybe even back hair, acne, male pattern baldness issues with a lot of these women. And then the other one is the irregular cycles, or I should say it's like 8 or less a year, to kind of, meet that. So you could have, like I said, those other couple, you know, um, criteria and not have cysts on your ovaries and be diagnosed. What I've learned, and what like I've my book too that I talk a lot about, is insulin resistance. I think it's like 70% of the cases, a lot of the times it goes back to insulin resistance, and this is just becoming. I think it's even more. I don't want to say common because I like it shouldn't be really common, but I think there's a lot more women out there that have it that we don't know about either. So, I mean, I've heard 25% of the, menstruating women have it. And then the other thing with that is like upwards of 80% of those are usually dealing with a lot of weight issues. And that's a lot of the times tied into the insulin resistance piece, especially around the midsection. Feel like they've tried anything and everything, can't get rid of the weight. It just keeps piling on. And so, yeah, when I first started too, I wanted to really focus on weight loss and PCOS. But I think what I found as I even just continued my practice, and I don't know, it's kind of evolved, and it's really more about healing and better health, because then the weight loss becomes more of a side effect of that. Sure, we all like to talk about weight loss. It's something we can actually measure more of, and we can look at a number on the scale as far as body fat and muscle mass, and of course the actual weight itself. But it really comes down to just better health, because I find a lot of women that also get into that victim mindset with this, and they think they're just stuck with that. And partially goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier with the doctors in the system. They hand them a diagnosis and they say this is a lifelong condition and we're just going to manage it, and this is you can take this medication and we'll see how that works out. So my goal is to let women know that there is hope out there, and I think they truly can feel better. They have to make that choice, that first step to do that.
No, 100%. I think the mind plays such a critical role in overall health. Um, the more that you think negatively, the more that it's going to turn out the way that you are thinking. As well as the more positive that you are, the more optimistic you are. The more positive the results that you're going to get, because ultimately you're going to feed into whatever you're feeding yourself, and want that to become true. Whether it's subconsciously or not. There's tons of studies and people talking about this phenomenon of the optimism mentality and how that turns out, better than people who are pessimists.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit more, right? Because, traditional medicine constantly talks about PCOS either, being having high andropause or, overweight, right? So they're either recommending birth control, why is that wrong? Or why is losing weight also not always the right thing? Because it's not always with people who are overweight, right? There is this lean PCOS that people see and talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what it comes down to is the nervous system. So, very similar to even what I went through, even though I didn't go through PCOS, I think a lot of things do come down to that, and regulating, the nervous system. When you're constantly in that fight or flight, constantly go, 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 your body is trying to just keep you in that mode, and it's not really prioritizing all the nourishment and all the things, the functions like that it needs, to make you feel better. And so a lot of, you mentioned the mind piece. A lot of what I do is just the foundation before I even get into the big nutrition piece is regulating the nervous system. So simple breath work, doing some inner work, to kind of determine, okay, am I really like, what's tying me to this food? Why do I keep, going to this food? Evaluating how they're feeling before, during, after eating. When you start kind of bringing some awareness to that, your eyes open up. They really do. And then we can kind of get into the nutrition piece, but there's still so many other factors. I see a lot of traumas around this, like a loss is an example of that, and then that can be tied into, if they haven't processed that loss or that trauma, it can exacerbate symptoms. There can be environmental factors as well that can add to stressing out the body and stressing out the nervous system, and it kind of becomes a vicious cycle, really, when you have
Yeah.
elevated cortisol levels, and that influences the insulin sensitivity, which influences hormonal regulation, and then it's constant. You're getting poor sleep, you're eating poorly, you're like, and so you're constantly feeding that cycle.
Before we continue, I want to share something deeply personal, the real reason my family started Nava Health. Over a decade ago, my mom was on her deathbed. Her organs were failing, and the doctors told us there was nothing they could do except keep her comfortable. In that moment, everything changed. We realized traditional medicine had limits, especially when it came to proactive and preventative root cause medicine built for long term health span and lifespan. At Nava Health, we take a data driven precision approach to longevity. We test over 90 biomarkers to uncover exactly what's happening inside your body, and we build a personalized plan designed around your unique biology. Because fatigue, brain fog, weight gain, they're not random, they're signals. And when you listen, your body can heal. This is functional longevity medicine done right. comprehensive, proactive, and built to help you feel and perform your best at any age. Go to navacenter.com and take control of your health today. Now back to the show.
And not only does the nervous system just dysregulation impact your overall feeling, the systems, it's going to throw your hormones all out of whack, but then also it's going to force you into bad habits when it comes to your food choices, right? Because of the flip of the hormones that you have there with so that's a huge part. So even someone who has the perfect diet struggling with a nervous system dysregulation and not able to manage their stress properly, you're just going to constantly be up against a wall, right? So what are some things that people can do that you're recommending to clients today to help calm down the nervous system?
Yeah. Well, like I said, step one, I think for me is breath work. So just a minute, like 3 times a day. It seems like so simple, but just to take some simple deep breaths. There's like 4-7-8 breathing. There's box breathing. You can do any of those. It doesn't matter. You can change it up. But what I have them do, the goal is to do that around a meal. Because a lot of the times that's just bringing awareness to what they're eating. And when they kind of, start like actually processing that, and then now beyond that, they're like, oh my gosh, so I ate this and now I feel, this way after. Now they're more aware of that as well. Maybe their energy dropped dramatically after eating something. So that's usually step one with me. Another thing that I talk about is even just adding over subtracting, because when you start a diet, you start, most things, you want to start taking away everything. And so that can stress out the body more. And when they're actually adding in, so adding in, just focusing on like protein, veggie with fiber, fruit at every meal would be ideal. But depending on how deficient they are, maybe we focus on one meal to start, every day.
Yeah.
And I always tell them too, it has to be just something every day. Like, we're not striving for perfection here. You're not going to be perfect. I'm not perfect every day, So just a little something to kind of move the needle, every day. Yeah, the other piece is just moving your body. Like, I get asked a lot about, workouts and all this, and there's all kinds of things out there, no high intensity, but of course you need strength training and all this stuff. And I'm like, again, I think just whatever doesn't stress you out, whatever, if a simple walk, brings you some joy, and whether that's 10 minutes a day, like, then do that. That's completely, but yeah, that's probably the let's start, I should say.
Yeah. Obviously, so you owned a kickboxing studio, right? And before you moved into coaching, what did that experience teach you about the difference between exercise and metabolic healing?
Oh, I love this one because, and I learned it myself. Like, and this is where I incorporated more of the nervous system stuff when I started my health coaching practice, because I would see so many women that would be, come into classes maybe 3 to 5 times a week, have amazing results. I would see others that would do the same and see no results at all. And then I would have others that, I'm like, okay, like, you see they're on a great path. And then all of a sudden it either stops, or maybe they start even gaining something back. So that's where like I said, it was a big wake up call then when I started, because I realized how much of a role the nervous system plays, how much our past childhood, even, traumas, past childhood experiences play a role in all of that. For me, when I was able to, when I realized I had a gluten issue, I was able to give it up. No problem. Like, no thought. I knew how I was going to feel. I was like, I don't want to feel like that. Done. And when I was talking to some of these women, and then of course, as I was sharing some of my experiences, they were sharing theirs. I would sit down with women that had celiac as well. And they were like, yeah, I just eat it, but I'm gonna, I'm just gonna suffer later. So just adding more, more to the metabolic dysfunction, more stress. It was a high intensity workout. We started with a 15-minute warm up that was it was a hit workout, like in 15 minutes. And then we would get into, you know, the bag rounds and punching and kicking the bag. And then we'd have a little finisher and stuff. So yeah, looking back, that workout was not for everybody. It was fun. And of course, we would tell people, you take it at your own pace, we'd give them modifications, all that stuff. But if they see the person next to them just going all out, of course, like they wouldn't want to, scale it back. So yeah, it was an amazing experience, but looking back, it's not for everybody because that can just add more stress, um, to the body.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we keep coming back to this like personalization thing. Everyone's so worried about what the next person is doing and what the next person's results look like, what they're posting on social media and Instagram that, it's built this disillusion of what people should be doing with their health. At the end of the day, you just need to focus on yourself, right? There's nothing, you shouldn't be in competition with anybody but yourself, right? Because that's all that matters. And their situation isn't yours, right? To your point, we're talking about exercise now. We're not talking about diet, we're not talking about supplements, we're not talking about hormones or peptides or GLPs. Talking about fitness, right? Even fitness, it's not a one size fits all model, right? Even that needs to be, geared towards you. You need to be able to listen to your body, right? Because if you are overstressed already, where you're just constantly in the sympathetic state, and then you go and do a hit workout, right? The impact that you're going to continue to push yourself closer to that edge, where doesn't matter if your diet's perfect. It doesn't matter if your sleep's perfect. It doesn't matter if you're doing all the crazy, awesome biohacks that are out in the world, which are great, right? I love the tools, but at the end of the day, if your foundation isn't locked in, it doesn't matter what else you're doing, right? And it all comes back to the simple thing of really mastering those pillars, right? Your sleep, your stress management, your movement, and did I say diet?
I don't think you said that one yet. I was waiting for it.
Yeah. You got to just make sure that you have your solid foundation right there. Right? You can't build a house that's going to be around for decades on a shaky foundation. So I love the biohacks. I love the longevity tips because, yeah, I think they can be useful tools, but also I think they can be a waste of money if you're not doing what matters most, right? And it's the foundational pillars. So I think that's huge.
Yeah, and that's what I talk a lot about too, like with supplements or, any other medications. They're great if they're a tool or a bridge, to help you get to where you're going. But if you're not focusing on all those other lifestyle habits and changes, they're going to be a short-term fix. They're not going to be, they're not a long-term solution at that point. They're just a quick fix.
Yeah. I think that leads perfectly into the next, right? This huge craze that we're seeing with GLP-1 medications, right? Like semaglutide, tirzepatide. If people are crazy enough to try to get their hands on retatrutide, depending on where it's being sourced and where they're getting it from, I know there's some suppliers that are getting it, from reliable sources, but again, it's such the wild, wild west. But let's go down this path, right? These GLPs, GIPs, the triple agonists are you in the camp of being for them or against them?
So I am like, what do I want to say? So in general, kind of against in a way, I want to say, like, if you're willing, if I can stop that person from even starting them and help them before they even get there, great. But I'm not fully against them in the fact that, like, if you feel like you need that, then go for it. But then that's where, like, I can come in and help you, make some changes while you're taking that, that medication or whatever it is, that are going to help you in the long run. Because as long as they understand it's not, it's not the solution. I mean, of course, we're hearing more about side effects. I was actually reading something this morning about scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency that they're seeing. And I mean, we haven't seen that for there was I think, epidemic back in the day, and but it comes down to nutritional deficiencies. So we're seeing that. I mean, I've heard of, blindness even as an extreme, not to mention at some point you just plateau. It stops working. I think close to 2 years is what I've, read. And so they need to understand the risk that they're taking with that. And so I'd love to assist them with that. But if that's what they feel like they need to do while they start working with me, then hey, that's fine. But my goal is eventually going to be to get them off. But if I can stop them from starting to begin with, then that's even better.
Yeah. I certainly think that they are, um, they're definitely not the solution, but they're definitely a tool. Um, and shifting from coming from the football arena to the corporate arena, my whole life it was, training to be a football player, right? So just the mentality and the mental mindset that I had um, was very different than most people, right? As you tell me to do something, I was going to go and do that to be successful as possible, right? I was following it to a T. Um, but like that's something that I had to train myself, where I had the mental toughness to do things even when I didn't want to do it, when it tasted horrible. The smoothies that I had to chug and throw back because I was trying to put on muscle or put on weight, whatever it was. I had the mental capacity to push myself through that, or um, doing the hard workouts. Shifting into the corporate space, I realized that not everyone is built that way, right? And making such drastic changes, not even drastic, little changes to the lifestyle habits that they've been doing for their whole life, um, is extremely difficult, right? So that's kind of like, where we come into the point of using this as a tool to give them that boost, right? To give them that confidence, get a little bit of that weight off, to help them feel better about themselves, build okay, like, the confidence of I'm starting to see lose weight. Let me keep, you know, buying into myself on this, right? Buying into the process of, okay, changing up my diet, focusing on my sleep, getting a little bit more movement, right? Because there is the whole other side of not utilizing it, right? Staying in the current state that they're in, right? Metabolically unhealthy, whether they're obese or overweight, um, having insulin resistance, right? Just that whole arena too also has its side effects, right? So you like which one outweighs the other. Obviously if you have someone who former, ultra athlete like yourself, or a Marine, like it's easier for them to make those hard changes on a dime. But for the most part, majority of people who haven't had to go or put themselves purposely into hard situations where they had to build that mental toughness, it's hard. So I do think they're extremely useful tools when used properly, though. Right? I'm not saying to just go out and buy it all online because that's what it's like. Go through a true practice that knows what they're doing. They're experts. They're actually going to do your labs right before making any recommendations because they can personalize it off that, or find other issues, underlying problems that you didn't know were there that could be causing the insulin resistance, that could be causing, your chronic fatigue, right? There's so much out there that if you're doing it the right way, through the right practice, through the right model, I think it's a extremely beneficial tool to give that kickstart.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So, let's kind of talk about how, because I think, that whole, the GLP-1 arena, um, it's kind of for everybody, but let's talk about how those drugs fit into the PCOS conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of goes into what you were saying, what you were just saying, because a lot of women, especially when they come to me, they feel like they've tried it all and they're ready, to make some changes. And of course, those are the ones I love to work with, because I know that they are gonna, follow the plan. Um, but like I mentioned earlier, with the insulin resistance piece, yes, they're dealing with the facial hair and the, acne and all this, but then the weight, especially around the midsection. And then it just kind of spirals, I think, from there. So, like you were saying, yeah. And then they just get frustrated. Their relationships suffer, their jobs suffer, maybe, depending on what they're doing, especially if they are sitting more during the day, then that's just compiling on too. Um, and so I think, though, like I'm in some Facebook PCOS Facebook groups, and unfortunately, I see it way too much in there. I think a lot of physicians are pushing it more, and that's where, sure, like, yes, it might be needed, but they get so like stuck on just using that.
Yeah, it's not the end all be all. Just like birth control certainly isn't the right answer. Just like losing weight isn't the right answer, right? It's a full whole body approach, right? We got to be able to control the nervous system. Yes, we got to be able to clean up your diet. Yes, we need to address your hormones because that's another thing that's misunderstood. Like just because most likely they have high andropause. If you're handling all the other things, one of the things like testosterone that, you said it earlier, and I also don't want to scare women away. The men's hormone, right? Testosterone. Testosterone is great for everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's both in men and in women. And one of the key roles that it does is helps with insulin sensitivity, right? Which is a huge piece and equate part of the problem to PCOS. So like it's so complex that finding professionals and experts who have the experience, like yourself, like what we do here at NAVA, um, you know, you don't have to do it on your own, right? You can find people who have the experience and have the knowledge. You don't We can take as much of the guesswork as possible out of it and help guide you down the right path, right? To giving you the answers that you need a lot sooner than just obviously going down the traditional path, right? Because they're definitely not trained or experts or geared for this. Because um, we've seen their results, right? It's where we're at today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and not to mention too, because this is another thing I see a lot of, insurance. Is insurance going to cover it? And then if you're paying out of pocket, more than likely through some, online website, whatever, that just, it's like a virtual doc that doesn't even really see you, that just, writes for it or whatever. That's another struggle. That's just adding more stress to the body that they don't,
Yeah.
that they don't need. So, yeah.
I'm excited to see people moving more towards, this type of space and utilizing other tools than what we've been using. But also at the same time, it's, those clinics or those telemedicine platforms that are just meeting with you for 5-10 minutes and writing prescriptions, send you on your way, right? Like that is certainly not the answer. It's not going to solve anything for some people who don't have as many health issues. Yeah, it might work for them for a little bit, but over time, there's going to be a plateau. Whether it's GLPs, whether it's peptides, whether it is hormones, because again, there's so much that goes into the equation, especially around hormones, and especially around women's hormones, right? Where they're at in their phase of life, right? Are they in perimenopause, menopause? There's so many things that play a factor on when to implement estrogen therapy, when to implement testosterone, progesterone, right? Do they have their ovaries, right? Are they a former breast cancer survivor? Like
Yeah.
there's so much that, these clinics that are just popping up, they don't have the expertise or the knowledge to do that, but they see an opportunity to make some money. And I don't think they're doing it to try to do harm. I think they're doing it to try to make money, but they're not understanding or realizing just how complex it really is.
Yeah, no, no. And I mean, and I love like, that's why I love having my podcast and networking and meeting people, like yourself too, because I'm just learning more. It takes a team. So whether you are going to your physician and whether it's a GLP-1 or, like you mentioned, metformin or birth control or whatever, like that's great. But then you also need maybe one or two other people. Maybe you need a therapist to talk to. Maybe you need, somebody like myself.
Yeah,
Something also to maybe complement that as well, because I think the more I learn and the more I talk to people, it's super hard to just do it on your own because there's so much going on there.
yeah. And I think that's, one of the things that we've done very differently was to build a team around the client, right? Where we have doctors, we have nurse practitioners, physicians assistants, we have nutritionists, we have nurses who are all geared around you to help you. And I think, right, just the whole community aspect. Community for longevity is huge. If you want to reduce someone's lifespan drastically, you put them in isolation, right? But if you have that community around you that you can ask questions to, that can support you, that you can learn from, just by their example that they're setting, or to ask questions, um, I think that's huge, right? So team, community, right? It all goes into a factor. Your podcast, my podcast, people, I think, for so long, we just thought to listen to doctors, right? Because, they're the closest thing to God. That's what we've been told. They know everything. We just need to follow that, right? And I think,
Mhm.
especially since COVID, the mindset shift where people are okay with asking more questions and okay at going, with going against the grain. And we're completely fine with people asking questions. We want you to ask questions so that we can educate you, we can give you what you're looking for, so that you feel comfortable making this decision, right? But you should also go ask other people, right? You should also go look it up, do your own research, right? It's okay to be inquisitive, right? It's okay to seek to understand, right? Just like in business, right? If a problem pops up, seek to understand first, because you got to understand what's truly going on to be able to address the issue.
Yeah, yeah, that's one thing I talk a lot about in my book too, is just, being your own advocate. Like if you're in and out of the doctor and you're not feeling like they're addressing your needs, like then do a little research on your own so you can either go back to that same doctor and present this information that you found, or maybe you need to find another doctor because yes, they're not all necessarily, I don't want to say bad, but like, in and out type of deal. Like some might actually spend a little bit more time with you, but you might need to find another doctor that actually you feel like is meeting your needs a little bit too. But the important thing is taking control of your health. And like you said, I think the shift since COVID in the last couple years, we are seeing a lot more of that now. I don't think enough people asked questions during that time, but now I think, we are starting to question more and open our eyes to all of it.
All right, so I got some rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
What's the most overlooked driver of weight gain?
Probably not just sugar, but the like 65 different names of sugar and what it's labeled. It could say no sugar on the label, but if you actually look at the ingredients, there's probably some form of sugar.
No, I think overall, unless it's natural, coming from your food sources, I think sugar is certainly devil's candy. It does so much weight gain, drives cancer through the roof. Metabolic dysfunction, cellular dysfunction, everything. There's nothing that's really good that comes
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
added sugars. All right, next one. What's the worst diet trend right now that you've seen?
Can I just say any of them? No. No, I mean, I don't know. Like, well, I will say this. I feel like almost everybody I've talked to has tried Weight Watchers at some point. Um, and Weight Watchers isn't Weight Watchers anymore. First of all, the whole calorie counting thing, and it ties into their point system, whatever. Um, that I think is no good. Like that's not what I teach. It's not a way of life. But now I think it's even shifted. So I don't know if it's a big trend right now, but I think from what I've read, heard, they are pushing more GLP-1s along with it. Um, and so I don't know if it's big trending, but I would say be careful with that one.
What do you feel is the most powerful lifestyle intervention for hormone optimization?
Well, probably goes back to the nervous system. And I think that like I could say nutrition, I could say move your body more, but I think at the foundation, it really comes down to the nervous system. So I think that, just that simple breath work, I think is a good start.
Yeah. So if a woman's listening right now was just diagnosed with PCOS, obviously that can be very overwhelming. Any diagnosis is never something someone wants to hear. What are the first three things that they should focus on to recovery?
I think the first thing would be awareness. Evaluate, like I mentioned earlier, how you're feeling with food. You know, why are you eating? Why are you eating that? How are you feeling while you're eating that? First bite, second bite, and then maybe afterwards, right after, an hour after, the next morning, take some notes down, like, 3 days maybe worth. Again, I don't like to try to stress people out, but like you can do it for 2 to 3 days. Jot down some notes. You're going to see some trends more than likely. Um, let's see. I'm going to say breath work again.
Stress management.
Stress management. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've even, like I said, I do it around food, but even when I've taught it to clients, whether they've gone through my full 90-day program or I've done just some other type of shorter thing with them, they find it so beneficial, even in the middle of their workday, if they're stressed, to just step aside for a minute and take just a few deep breaths and, and calm the nervous system.
So we got stress management, we got jotting down your food to potentially stabilize your blood sugar, and what's the third?
I would say don't focus so much on removing everything. Like I mentioned earlier, I think adding, your body is probably it's craving the safety, it's craving the nutrients. Um, it could be craving other things. We say hunger, we might think about food, but it could be craving other things. But adding in some love, adding in some nutrients to your meals, and then your body's going to naturally want to eliminate and subtract the other stuff. And again, I think that then ties into the awareness piece. Like I mentioned, kind of, I call it the food timeline, with evaluating, how you're feeling with meals, because then that will tie into that. And then naturally, yeah, then you might want to start like removing the sugars or the gluten or the dairy or something like that, because you might discover that could be a culprit in how you're feeling.
So last and not least, before we close out, when it's all said and done, what is it that you want your legacy to be remembered by?
I mean, my goal is to help women move beyond a diagnosis, and I think they have to know they're not defined by that diagnosis, whether it is PCOS or anything else. My message is to just spread hope and healing. I do that, I think, with my podcast. My podcast is not always super PCOS specific, because I want these women to know that no matter what you're going through, there is hope out there. And I think part of that is, like I've been, kind of talking about, like I went through, is understanding the messages behind those symptoms. What is your body trying to tell you? Like, you can't be down on yourself because you're feeling X, Y, and Z. You have to really kind of learn from it and like just be curious. Like, what is my body trying to tell me? And what does my body need, to actually start on that journey? But I just want women to know that they can truly heal, and feel better.
No, I love that. And I think to your point, right, you shouldn't be defined by a diagnosis, and a diagnosis also, isn't the end of the world. There is healing. There is a way to live a much better, optimized life. It's not a death sentence. I don't think any diagnosis is a true death sentence, right? It all just depends, how you take that mentally, right? Are you going to be a victim or a victor of that, right? PCOS affects millions of women. Yet so many are still told, the same frustrating, right? Eat less, move more, but there's much better ways to go about it. Today's conversation, we obviously showed, the real story, that it's much deeper, right? Hormones are signals, our metabolism matters, how we're thinking or stressing about something plays a much bigger picture than most people think. Stress can actually kill you, right? I mean, it has that much control. But when you actually start addressing the root cause and treating the body holistically as a whole, your body can heal, right? We are these amazing creations, inventions that our bodies are able to heal, right? And I think that's something that people lose sight of and think because they're diagnosed, there's nothing else that they can do. But no, I really appreciate you, taking the time and sharing your story, and just the work that you're doing, right? And helping people reclaim their health.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
If today's conversation sparked something in you, here's what I want you to do right now. Pick one strategy, one insight, one small action you heard today, and commit to it this week. Excellence isn't built in moments. It's built in the daily decisions that compound over time. Remember, you're not just building a healthier body or a more successful career. You're building a legacy that will outlast you. And that starts with the standards you set today. Thanks for listening to the Legacy and Longevity Podcast. If this episode was valuable, first subscribe so you never miss an episode. Then leave us a review to help more people find these conversations. And finally, share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. Until next Tuesday, keep raising the bar, keep pushing your limits, and keep stacking days. I'm Zach Dancel. Your legacy starts now.